Some lies die on the road, others wait for the right night to rise from the dust. It had been 20 years since Mason Hale last spoke the words that kept him alive. 20 years since he'd stood at the edge of a desert bar in northern Nevada, trembling, bleeding, telling a lie so heavy it rode with him long after the engines went quiet. He thought the desert had buried it. He thought time had erased the faces who heard it. But the road doesn't forget, and some ghosts don't stay gone. On a cold October night in '89, Mason walked into a bar off Highway 93 just to warm his hands and quiet his thoughts. The floorboards creaked the same way they had decades before. The smell of old beer and gasoline hadn't changed. Even the neon sign flickered like it remembered him, but that wasn't what made his chest tighten. It was the jacket on the stranger sitting at the back table, black leather, worn at the shoulders, with a patch Mason hadn't seen since the night his lie saved his life. A patch belonging to a man who should have been dead. The stranger didn't look his way at first. He simply lifted his beer, watching the room through the mirror behind the bar. Calm, still, patient. Like a man who had driven miles for one purpose. Mason felt the truth he'd buried years ago, clawing its way back to the surface. The lie was here. It had found him. And the road wanted an answer. Because in Nevada, legends live long, but lies live longer. Some stories don't start with engines. They start with fear. The kind a man doesn't admit he carries. Mason Hale had been running from the same night for 2 decades. A night when the desert wind howled like an open grave. When loyalty broke, when survival demanded something he never forgave himself for. He wasn't proud of what he'd done, but he was alive because of it. For 20 years, Mason rode from town to town, never staying long enough for questions, never talking about the club he abandoned, and never wearing a patch again. He lived quiet, fixing engines, minding his business, drinking only enough to sleep through the memories. But the road has its own memory, and Nevada remembers its debts. That October night, when Mason stepped into the Highway 93 roadhouse, he wasn't looking for trouble. He was looking for a place to disappear, the kind of bar where men spoke with their eyes instead of their mouths, the kind of bar that let ghosts sit quietly. But fate doesn't ask for permission to return. The stranger in the back wasn't drinking like the others. He wasn't laughing. He wasn't killing time. He was waiting. And the jacket he wore, cracked leather, faded symbols, stitched by hands Mason once called brothers, was proof that the past hadn't died at all. It had simply been following him, mile after mile, waiting for the right moment to sit down across from him. Before we enter this story, before the truth catches up to Mason and forces the road to choose who survives, take a breath. Because tonight, we're not just riding into a confrontation, we're riding into a confession carved across 2 decades of dust and regret. If you feel stories like this in your bones, consider subscribing and hitting the like button. It keeps these roads alive. And if you've lived a story worth telling, share it or send it privately. Maybe your miles become the next chapter we bring to life. Mason Hale was not always a man who ran from his own shadow. Once, he'd been the kind of rider who laughed louder than the engines, who carried loyalty like a second skin, who would have taken a punch or a bullet for the brothers he rode with. Back then, he thought the road was simple. You stick with your own, you tell the truth, and you ride until the desert ends or the gas runs out. But anyone who's lived long enough knows one thing. The road has a way of teaching lessons that don't come cheap. It happened in the spring of '69 on a stretch of desert outside a mining ghost town. Mason and his club were running escort for a supply truck when an ambush turned the night into fire and screaming engines. Bullets ricocheted off rocks, tires burst, dust exploded under boots. It was chaos, the kind of chaos men don't walk away from clean. Mason had dived behind an overturned bike, blood running down his arm, ears ringing. Through the dust, he saw 2 things clearly. His club president, a man named Riker Ward, taking a round to the chest and falling, and another brother, Clay Mercer, being dragged by two masked men toward a truck. He made a choice. He had seconds. He could save one, not both. And the lie began the instant he chose wrong. He rushed toward Riker, dropping beside him, pressing a hand over the wound, shouting for help that never came. Clay disappeared into the truck's open doors with a last look that Mason would spend the next 20 years seeing every time he tried to sleep. When the gunfire stopped, when the dust settled, when the dead were counted, Mason was the only witness who had seen what really happened. But fear is a dangerous editor. Fear rewrites events. Fear convinces a man to bend truth into something easier to survive. So when the surviving members gathered around the firelight hours later, broken and exhausted, Mason told the lie that would follow him for the rest of his life. That masked bastard shot Riker, and Clay ran into the dark. I tried to stop him. It was clean. It was believable. And most of all, it kept the club from tearing itself apart. Riker became a fallen leader. Clay became a coward who abandoned his brothers. And Mason became the one who fought to the last breath, the one who stood his ground, the one they thanked. He hated every word of it. But when a man is drowning, he'll drink whatever lie floats toward him, even if it burns later. After the funerals, after the club fractured, after half the men drifted into prisons or graves, Mason packed his things, left Nevada, and swore he'd never wear a patch again. He lived 2 decades like a ghost, a mechanic in backwater towns, a man who nodded instead of speaking, a pair of tired eyes behind dark sunglasses. People didn't ask him questions because his silence answered most of them. But the desert never forgets a lie spilled on its dirt. So when Mason walked into that roadhouse in '89, when he saw that stranger wearing Clay Mercer's old colors, the same colors that should have been buried with the truth, the past snapped its jaws around him like a pit trap. The stranger didn't look like Clay, too young, too calm, but the patch, worn, cracked, unmistakable, sent a chill through Mason's bones. He sat at the bar, feeling the weight of 20 years pressing against his ribs. Every sip of whiskey tasted like sand. Every sound, chairs scraping, boots thudding, neon humming, sank under the pounding of his heartbeat. Someone slid onto the stool beside him. Not the stranger at the back table. Someone closer, older, with eyes that recognized more than they should. "Mason Hale," the man said quietly. Mason's throat tightened. He didn't turn. "I don't use that name anymore." "You might not," the man replied, "but someone else does. Someone who's been looking for you." Mason's fingers froze around his glass. No lie stays buried forever. Not in Nevada. Not on a road that remembers. Mason didn't turn right away. The name he'd abandoned 20 years ago hung between them like smoke from a fire that refused to die out. The bar felt too quiet suddenly, the kind of quiet that happens when the universe leans in to listen. "Who's looking for me?" Mason finally muttered. The older man beside him shifted, pulling his jacket tighter. He wasn't wearing colors, but Mason recognized the stance. Strong back, heavy shoulders, a life spent on the road. A man carved by miles. "A rider," the stranger said. "Young, maybe late 20s. Been tracking you through Nevada, Arizona, Utah. Last saw him heading back this way." Mason's gut twisted. Late 20s. Same age Clay would have been if he'd had a son before the incident. Same age as the kid wearing Clay's patch in the back of the room. He swallowed dry. "And who the hell are you?" "Name's Doyle." The man's voice stayed low. "Rode with a few clubs back in the day, grew out of it, but I keep my ear to the ground." His eyes flicked toward the back table. "And something tells me you should too." Mason's stomach knotted. He risked a glance over his shoulder. The young rider still sat there, boots planted, back straight, fingers tapping lightly against his bottle. He wasn't nervous. He wasn't impatient. He was waiting with the kind of discipline Mason had seen only in riders who'd been hardened by real loss. Doyle sighed. Kid said he's searching for the man who betrayed his father. Mason froze. And, Doyle added, the man who let his father die. Every sound in the bar seemed to fall away. The clinking glasses, the jukebox hum, the laughter from the pool table, leaving only the echo of Doyle's words and Mason's accelerating heartbeat. Clay Mercer's face flashed in his mind, dust-covered, terrified, reaching for help during the ambush that night. A hand Mason didn't take. Mason drew a slow breath. Clay never had kids. Doyle shook his head. You sure about that? Mason wasn't. Not anymore. The neon lights flickered above the bar, casting long, trembling shadows across the floorboards. Mason studied the bottle in his hand, watching the whiskey swirl like desert sandstorms. His fingers trembled, something they hadn't done in years. What's his name? Mason asked. Goes by Reeves, Doyle said. Reeves Mercer. Mason's breath caught in his throat. The kid wasn't just wearing Clay's patch. He was Clay's blood, and he had come looking for answers or vengeance. Before Mason could speak, the bar door swung open, letting in a cold wave of desert air. The wind pushed dust across the floor, scattering it like the past rearranging itself. Reeves Mercer lifted his eyes from the mirror and locked onto Mason's reflection. It was a calm stare, a stare that said, I've waited long enough. Mason felt the years tighten around him like a noose. Doyle whispered, You can walk out now, slip into the night, roads long enough for running. Mason set his empty glass down carefully. I've been running for 20 years, he said. Doesn't seem to have worked. Doyle studied him a moment, then gave a slow nod. Then stand your ground. Say what needs saying. But Mason wasn't sure there were words strong enough to fix the kind of truth he'd twisted. Reeves stood from his table. His movements were slow, deliberate, boots steady, shoulders squared. He crossed the room one silent step at a time until he stood a few feet from Mason. The bar didn't go quiet. It froze. Even the jukebox seemed to drop a note. Reeves spoke first. Are you Mason Hale? Mason turned fully at last. Every scar inside him felt like it cracked open. Yes, he said. Reeves nodded once, not in respect, but in recognition, like a hunter confirming the identity of what he'd been tracking. My father died because of a lie, Reeves said softly, and you're the one who told it. The weight of 20 years crashed down on Mason's shoulders. There was no escape now, not from Reeves, not from the truth, not from the desert that recorded every sin spoken into its dust. For a long moment, no one in the bar moved. Not Doyle, not the men at the pool table, not the bartender drying the same glass for almost a full minute. It felt like the desert itself had pressed its ear against the walls, waiting to hear what would come next. Mason swallowed hard. The words stuck in his throat like gravel. Reeves. Listen. No. The young man's voice was calm, but absolute. You've had 20 years to talk. Tonight, you're going to listen. Mason shut his mouth. Something in Reeves's eyes held him there, not anger, not vengeance, something heavier. Loss. A loss so old it no longer screamed, it whispered. Reeves stepped closer, boots thudding slowly across the wood. My father, he began, died with one thing carved into his memory, betrayal. He died believing you left him, that you lied to save yourself. Mason felt the old wound reopen, the one he'd patched over with whiskey, miles, and silence. Reeves continued, voice steady. When I was a kid, he told me stories about the men he rode with, stories about loyalty and honor and the road that binds brothers together, but every story ended the same way, with the night that broke him. He paused. The night you chose fear over truth. A murmur rippled through the bar. Even men who knew nothing of biker codes understood the weight of that accusation. Mason inhaled shakily. Your father, Clay, he wasn't a coward. He didn't run. Reeves' eyebrow twitched. That's not what you told the club. I know, Mason whispered, and I've been paying for that lie every damn day since. The jukebox flicked to another song. Low, melancholic guitar strings. It felt wrong, like background music for a confession no one wanted to hear. Reeves tilted his head slightly. Then tell me the truth. Here, now. Mason wiped a hand across his mouth. His palms were sweating. They hadn't done that since Vietnam. I tried to save your father, he said. I swear to you, but I made a choice that shouldn't have been mine to make. Reeves's jaw tightened. Go on. Mason closed his eyes for a second, gathering the memory like lifting a rusted box from the bottom of a well. That night, we were ambushed. Riker went down. Clay was being dragged away. I knew if I ran to him, I'd die too. He hesitated. I froze, and by the time I moved, he was gone. Reeves stared at him, unreadable. Mason continued, voice trembling. Afterward, the club needed a story. They needed a villain, someone to blame, someone to bury the pain under. He exhaled deeply. So I lied. I said Clay ran, that he abandoned us. His eyes glistened with shame. But the truth is, I'm the one who abandoned him. A heavy silence settled across the bar, the kind that tastes like metal and regret. Reeves looked at him for a long time, too long. Long enough that Mason wished the kid would just throw a punch and get it over with. But Reeves didn't raise a hand. He raised a question. Why didn't you come clean sooner? Mason's voice cracked. Because I didn't deserve forgiveness, and I sure as hell didn't expect it. Reeves's gaze shifted, just slightly. Not softer, but deeper, like he was searching for something inside Mason that might still be salvageable. Then he said quietly, my father didn't die that night. Mason's breath caught. What? Reeves nodded slowly. He lived for 13 years. The room tilted. Mason gripped the bar to steady himself. He survived the ambush, Reeves said. Escaped, built a life, had me. His voice cracked for the first time, but the wound inside him never healed. He lived with hate for a ghost. You, the man he believed, left him in the dirt. Mason felt the blow like a punch to the ribs. Reeves, I didn't know. Reeves raised a hand, silencing him without aggression. Just gravity. I'm not here to kill you, he said softly. If I wanted revenge, you'd have never seen me walk through that door. Mason swallowed again, throat tight. Then why are you here? Reeves's eyes, for the first time, shifted from steel to sorrow. To decide whether my father died with the wrong story in his heart. The words hit Mason harder than any fist ever could, and the desert, listening through the bar walls, held its breath. Reeves didn't move for a moment. He just stood there, studying Mason the way a man studies a road he's about to ride, checking for cracks, shadows, hidden danger. The bar stayed frozen around them, caught in the tension like flies in amber. Finally, Reeves reached into his jacket. Every biker in the bar shifted, not because they expected a weapon, but because they felt the weight of whatever he was about to pull out. He withdrew a small, weathered envelope, yellowed by time, edges worn soft, stamped with Nevada dust that refused to let go. Mason's heartbeat thudded in his ears. Reeves held the envelope between them, his fingers steady, voice controlled. My father wrote this the night before he died, Reeves said. He never mailed it, never showed it to anyone. A beat. He kept it in the drawer beside his bed. I only found it after he passed. The room tilted again. Mason gripped the back of a chair to steady himself. Reeves took a breath, a deep, grounding one. He wrote your name on it. A soft gasp rippled through the nearby tables. Mason stared at the envelope as if it were radioactive. He didn't reach for it. Couldn't. Reeves didn't offer it yet. Instead, he said, let me read you something first. He unfolded a single sheet of paper. The creases cracked, the ink faded but still legible, the handwriting of a man who had run out of tomorrows. Reeves began to read. Mason Hale. I don't know if you're alive. I don't know if you'd even want to hear from me, but I need to write this before the anger finishes what the bullet started inside me. Mason's knees weakened. He didn't sit. He forced himself to stand in the truth. Reeves continued. That night, when I was dragged away, I thought you'd come for me. I kept waiting. Minutes felt like hours. Hours felt like days. Then it hit me. You didn't choose me. You chose Riker. Mason closed his eyes in pain. For years, I told myself you were a coward. It was easier than believing the truth. That fear changed both of us. Reeves paused, watching Mason crumble inwardly. But today, after all these years, I realized something. A man isn't made of the worst thing he ever did. He's made of what he becomes after. Mason's breath hitched, his vision blurred. Reeves' voice softened as he reached the final lines. If our paths never cross again, let this be my last word to you. I forgive you. Maybe one day you'll forgive yourself. But the desert doesn't keep score, Mason. People do. And I'm tired of keeping count. Reeves folded the letter slowly, carefully, like the fragile thing it was. The bar stayed silent, reverent. Some men looked away out of respect. Others stared at Mason with something like sympathy. Reeves stepped forward and finally extended the envelope. Mason stared at it, tears forming but refusing to fall. His hand lifted only halfway before it trembled violently. Reeves laid the envelope gently on the bar beside him. My father didn't die hating you, he said quietly. He died carrying a wound he didn't know how to close. I came here to see if you were the one who put it there, or if you were the only one still bleeding from it. Mason opened his mouth, but no words came, not even breath. Reeves stepped back, giving him space. Doyle, watching from a distance, murmured, "Easy, son." But Mason couldn't hear anything except the echo of Clay's forgiveness, a forgiveness he'd never believed he deserved. Reeves finally asked, "Tell me the truth, Mason." A beat. "Were you the man my father needed that night, or the man you became afterward?" Mason wiped his eyes with the back of his hand, and for the first time in 20 years, he stopped running. Mason stared at the letter as if it were a loaded revolver pointed at his chest. Clay's forgiveness sat on the bar between them like a warm coal, one that burned without mercy, not from hatred, but from truth. For 20 years, Mason had imagined what Clay would have said if he'd survived long enough to confront him. He never imagined this. Reeves waited, arms crossed loosely, not aggressive, not even tense, just steady. Steady in a way that reminded Mason painfully of Clay. "Talk," Reeves said quietly. Mason swallowed. His throat felt like sandpaper. His hands shook as if the desert wind itself had crawled inside his bones. "I wasn't the man your father needed," he began, voice trembling. "Not that night. Not ever since." Reeves didn't blink. He wanted the full truth, not the summary Mason had given before, but the soul of it. Mason looked down at his hands, at the calluses, the scars, the dirt of years spent trying to outrun himself. "I froze," he whispered. "When they dragged your father away, I froze. I should have run after him. I should have shot till the gun clicked empty. I should have—" His voice cracked. "I should have been braver." Reeves's jaw tightened, not from anger, but from something else. Anticipation, pain, maybe both. Mason continued. "When the ambush ended, the club needed a story. They needed someone to blame. Riker was dead. The others were hurt. Everyone was confused. And He pressed a shaking hand to his forehead. "I couldn't tell them I'd failed him. I couldn't live with that truth. So I lied." The last word came out hollow. Reeves took a slow breath through his nose. "You told them my father ran." "Yes. You painted him as a coward." Mason nodded. "I did. And you lived with that." "Not lived," Mason said. "I carried it. Like dragging a corpse on my back every mile I rode." The bar was silent, except for the low hum of a neon sign struggling to stay lit. Reeves stepped closer. "If my father forgave you," he said slowly, "why can't you forgive yourself?" Mason looked up sharply, not expecting the question, not prepared for the depth in the young man's eyes. Clay's eyes. "Because I don't deserve it," Mason said. "Forgiveness is for men who made mistakes. What I did wasn't a mistake. It was a choice." Reeves studied him. Something softened in his gaze, but only slightly. "My father spent years hating a man who wasn't real," Reeves said. "A ghost made from anger and half-truths. That's why I came here, to meet the real man." Mason exhaled shakily. "And now that you have..." Reeves didn't answer immediately. He walked past Mason, stopping at the other side of the bar, leaned on the counter, looked at the letter in Mason's hands, looked at the floor, looked at the doorway. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet, almost gentle. "You didn't abandon my father." Mason's head snapped up. "I did." "No," Reeves said. "You failed him. That's different." He tapped the bar lightly. "Abandonment is walking away on purpose. Failure is being too human." Mason was stunned. Reeves continued, eyes heavy with a grief that had never found a place to rest. "If you'd abandoned him, you wouldn't have carried his ghost for 20 years. You wouldn't be standing here shaking like a man standing in front of judgment. You wouldn't care." Mason's knees buckled, and he finally sat. Doyle watched from the side, arms crossed, jaw set, understanding that he was witnessing something men rarely get in this life, a reckoning without blood. Reeves stepped closer, but not threateningly. He stood in front of Mason, looking down at him, not as an executioner, but as a son searching for the last missing piece of his father. "My father didn't die because you didn't save him," Reeves said softly. "He died because he didn't know how to live with what happened. That wasn't on you." Mason pressed his palms to his eyes. "It feels like it was." "Then let me give you something," Reeves said, voice steady. "My father forgave you. I didn't come here for revenge. I came here to decide if that forgiveness was deserved." Mason's hands fell slowly from his face. "And is it?" he whispered. A long pause, a breath, a decision. "I don't know yet," Reeves said honestly. "Forgiveness isn't a switch, it's a road." He stepped back. "And I think you're finally ready to walk it." The room exhaled. Mason exhaled. For the first time in decades, the weight on his shoulders shifted, not gone, but lighter, like a chain finally loosening. But the night wasn't over. Reeves wasn't done. Because forgiveness is one thing, but truth demands something else entirely. Mason wasn't sure how long he sat there, elbows on the bar, breathing like a man who had just come up from underwater. Reeves had stepped back, but not far. Doyle watched carefully, as if ready to stop the night from turning sideways. But Reeves wasn't done. Not even close. Clay's forgiveness wasn't the only thing he left behind. Reeves finally said, "There's something else you need to know." Mason straightened, his heart tightening. "What is it?" Reeves looked down at the floorboards, then out the window toward the vast Nevada dark. The kind of dark that swallows headlights if a man rides far enough into it. "When my father died," Reeves began slowly, "I went through everything he left behind. Tools, old patches, photos." He paused. "And something else. Something he didn't want found until after he was gone." Mason felt the air shift. "What did you find?" Reeves took a long breath. "Reports," he said. "Letters, notes, about the men who ambushed you that night." Mason's spine straightened. Cold shot down his limbs. "No," he whispered. "Clay didn't." "He did," Reeves said, cutting him gently but firmly. "He spent years hunting them, tracking them, trying to figure out who they were, why they attacked, who hired them." Mason's mouth went dry. "We always thought it was a random ambush," he murmured. "It wasn't," Reeves replied. "It was planned." The bar seemed to shrink around them. Doyle's face hardened. Someone closer to the jukebox muttered a curse. Mason's voice dropped to a brittle whisper. "By who?" Reeves looked at him with a sadness so deep it seemed older than he was. Someone inside your own club. Mason's breath left his lungs all at once. No, he said. No. Riker never... It wasn't Riker, Reeves said. It was a lie somewhere else. Someone else. Someone who wanted the club fractured. Someone who needed a power vacuum. The words hit Mason like a wrench to the ribs. Clay got close to the truth, Reeves said. Closer than anyone realized. Close enough that he left me clues in case something happened to him. Mason tried to speak, but his voice failed. He felt his heart pounding like a hammer against the inside of his chest. Reeves continued, That's why I came looking for you. He paused. I didn't come just for answers about that night. I came because you're the only surviving man who knew the club before it broke apart. The only one who might recognize the signs Clay found. Mason stared at him. You think the ambush wasn't meant for Clay or Riker? A beat. You think it was meant for me? Reeves nodded once. Mason recoiled, as if struck. Why the hell would anyone want me dead? I wasn't anyone. I wasn't a leader. No, Reeves said. You weren't. That was exactly why you were dangerous. Mason blinked. That makes no damn sense. It does, Reeves said, stepping closer. My father wrote one line in his notes, one line he circled 3 times. Reeves paused, then recited, A man who wants power fears the one who sees too clearly. Mason's stomach twisted. Clay had always said Mason noticed things, too many things. You were loyal to Riker, Reeves said. Smart, respected, and not interested in power. That made you a problem. Mason dragged a hand across his face. You're telling me somebody in the club hired killers to take out Riker, Clay, and me? Reeves nodded. That's exactly what I'm telling you. The bar erupted with whispered curses and muttering. Even Doyle looked shaken. Mason felt the ground tilt beneath him. For 20 years, he'd believed his mistake had ruined the club. For 20 years, he'd carried a guilt that wasn't entirely his to bear. For 20 years, he'd blamed himself for the night that shattered everything. But now the truth was clawing its way out of the dark. The ambush wasn't an accident. The lie wasn't the beginning. It was the middle. And Mason wasn't just a coward. He was a target. Reeves exhaled slowly. And the man who ordered it, his voice dropped to a deep, cold note, is still alive. Mason's pulse roared in his ears. Reeves looked him dead in the eyes. And he knows you're back in Nevada. Mason felt the blood drain from his face. The man who ordered the ambush was still alive, still watching, still protecting a secret that had already cost lives. For 20 years, Mason thought he'd been running from guilt. He'd been running from someone else. Reeves leaned on the bar, voice low but firm. My father's note said whoever planned it would eliminate anyone who got too close. That included him and you. Doyle cursed under his breath. Damn, makes sense. Riker was respected. Clay was loyal. Mason, he looked at Mason. You were the only one smart enough to put the pieces together back then. Mason shook his head, disbelief warring with dawning horror. I never suspected anyone inside. Never. That was the point, Reeves said. Clay figured it out only because they tried to kill him after the ambush. He survived, but barely. And he spent years tracing the loose ends. Mason's voice dropped to a whisper. And now someone knows you came to me. Reeves hesitated, then nodded. Mason felt something cold settle inside him. Reeves, when did you last see him? Reeves frowned. Who? The man following you? Reeves' face tensed instantly. He opened his mouth to ask what Mason meant, but the bar door creaked. A gust of desert wind pushed dust across the floor, and 3 men stepped inside. Not boys, not drifters, men who carried themselves like men used to violence, sharp eyes, hands never far from their belts, quiet boots that respected silence too much to be harmless. Doyle stiffened. Trouble. Reeves didn't turn his head, but his eyes hardened. Mason's chest tightened. He recognized the stance, the posture, the precision. Mercenaries, exactly the kind who had dragged Clay away decades ago. The tallest one scanned the bar, casual to anyone who didn't know better. His gaze slid past the pool tables, past the jukebox, past Doyle, and landed on Mason. The man's lips curled into a faint smile, like he'd just found what he came for. Reeves whispered, "Is that?" "Yes," Mason breathed. "One of them, or someone working for the same man." For a moment, everything froze. The music, the chatter, the neon flicker, the night. Then the mercenary raised a hand and tapped 2 fingers against his temple in a mock salute. "Well," he said softly, voice carrying far too easily in the quiet room, "isn't this a reunion?" Doyle stepped forward. "You lost?" The man's smile widened. "No, I'm exactly where I need to be." Reeves shifted subtly, positioning himself between Mason and the intruders. The mercenary noticed and chuckled. "Look at that. The boy protects the liar." Mason felt heat rise in his lungs, not anger, and purpose, the kind he hadn't felt since he wore a patch on his back. "What do you want?" Mason said, standing up slowly. The mercenary tilted his head. "I want what the desert never got to finish." His eyes narrowed. "And what Clay Mercer failed to understand. Some men know too much to be left alive." Reeves bristled. "You talk about my father again and what?" The mercenary whispered. "History will repeat, a boy losing his father twice." The room erupted in tension. 2 bikers at the pool table stepped away from their cues. The bartender ducked behind the counter. Doyle's jaw flexed like stone ready to split. Mason placed a steady hand on Reeves's shoulder. "Easy." Reeves looked at him. "They killed him. They tried to kill you. Which is exactly why we can't lose our heads now," Mason said, voice low, steady. "That's what they want." The mercenary clasped his hands behind his back, relaxed, patient. "You two can talk all night," he said, "but the endings never change. One of you dies. Maybe both." A second mercenary locked the door behind them. A third flipped the open sign to close. Reeves whispered, "Mason, I know." Mason said, eyes narrowing, "It's happening again." Doyle moved closer. "We're not letting them take you." The mercenary smirked. "You think loyalty means something out here? You think anyone will remember you tomorrow when we bury you where the coyotes can finish the job?" Mason squared his shoulders, for the first time in 20 years feeling like the man he used to be. "There's something you don't understand," he said. The mercenary raised a brow. Mason's voice dropped into a slow, steady growl. "I'm not the same man you tried to kill back then." Reeves stepped beside him. "And he's not alone anymore." The mercenary's smile faded. For the first time that night, the killers looked uncertain. The 3 mercenaries spread across the bar like wolves circling cattle, slow, confident, predatory. They didn't pull weapons. They didn't need to. Their presence alone was a warning. This isn't about a fight. This is about finishing a job left undone. Reeves shifted his weight, ready to spring. Doyle raised his chin, eyeing exits, counting bodies, measuring distance, the instincts of a man who'd lived through too many nights like this. Mason breathed, steady, focused. The fear that had owned him for 20 years was gone. Facing the men who tried to destroy him didn't make him break. It made him remember who he used to be. The lead mercenary stepped forward. His boots barely made a sound, but his voice carried like a blade scraping stone. "You've lived too long, Hale. The man who hired us back then doesn't tolerate loose ends." Mason's eyes narrowed. "Who is he?" The mercenary grinned. "Oh, he'd like to tell you himself." He nodded to the man closest to the door. The second mercenary reached into his jacket, but instead of a gun, he took out a small radio. He clicked it twice. A burst of static hissed through the bar. Then a voice came through, cold, calm, old and familiar enough to make Mason's blood turn to ice. "Hello, Mason." Reeves went rigid. Doyle's breath caught, but Mason felt something far worse. Recognition. "No," he whispered. "It can't be." The voice chuckled softly. "After all these years, you still doubt your own memory?" Mason stumbled back half a step. Reeves stared at him. "Who is it?" Mason swallowed hard. The truth tasted like rust. "Calderon," he said. "Calderon Ward." Reeves blinked. "Ward, as in—" "Riker's older brother," Mason said. "The man who left the club before the ambush. The man who always wanted control." His voice trembled. "He hired them. He set the trap." The radio crackled again. "Riker was weak," Calderon said. "He would have ruined everything. And you saw too much. Clay Mercer saw too much. The three of you were problems I intended to fix the same night." Reeves clenched his fists. "You tried to kill my father." Calderon laughed, a cold, empty sound. "And I failed, but tonight I correct that mistake." The mercenaries began to move in. Slow, deliberate steps, tightening the circle. The bartender ducked behind the counter. Two bikers backed into the shadows. Doyle cracked his neck. "Mason, we're not walking out of here unless—" Mason held up a hand. He stepped forward, straight into the mercenaries' path. He didn't shake, he didn't stutter, he didn't run. "Calderon," Mason said, voice steady, "you tried to kill Riker, not to save the club, but to own it." "Ownership requires strength," Calderon replied. "Something you never had." Mason's jaw tightened. "I didn't have strength that night. You're right about that." A breath. "But I have it now." Reeves stepped up beside him. Then Doyle. Then three bikers from the pool table. Men who didn't know the full story, but knew enough to stand beside a man taking responsibility. The mercenaries paused. This wasn't the frightened mechanic they'd expected. This wasn't the guilty ghost of a man. This was Mason Hale, the rider Riker had trusted. The man Clay had forgiven. The man who had spent 20 years becoming someone who deserved a second chance. "Tell me something," Mason said to the radio. "Why now? Why send your dogs after me tonight?" The answer was immediate. "Because Reeves Mercer opened a wound that never healed. He's been asking questions, your questions, and I don't leave threads hanging." Reeves bristled. "So you want us both dead?" "Of course," Calderon said. "This ends where it should have ended in '69. The mercenaries moved in again, tighter, faster, coordinated. But something had shifted in the room. Mason stepped forward toward them. "If you want me dead," he said, "you're going to have to look me in the eye this time." The lead mercenary cracked his knuckles. "A pleasure." But before he could take another step, a motorcycle engine roared outside, then another, then 3, 5, 7. Doyle smiled slowly. "Well," he said, "looks like the desert remembers more than you thought." Headlights flooded through the dusty windows. Engines thundered like a storm breaking open. The lie that once saved Mason had come full circle, and the road had brought witnesses this time. The mercenaries froze at the sound. Outside, engines thundered like a coming storm, deep, synchronized, disciplined, not chaos, not a bar fight, a convoy. Doyle grinned, slow and dangerous. "Looks like your boys aren't the only ones who know how to track a man." Dust kicked under the door as more bikes rolled in. Headlights flashed through the windows in long, sweeping arcs like sweeping searchlights. Reeves's brows furrowed. "Who are they?" Mason didn't answer at first. He was listening, really listening. The engines had a rhythm, a cadence carved only by old riders, men who rode long roads for reasons heavier than pride. And then it hit him. "I know those bikes," Mason whispered. The door burst open and the bar filled with silhouettes, leather jackets cracked with age, patches faded but unmistakable. A half-forgotten emblem glowed in the neon light. The last wardens, Riker's old brothers. Men who had never forgiven the night their club died. Men who had spent 20 years thinking Mason betrayed them. The first rider stepped in. Broad shoulders, grey in the beard, a scar across his cheek. "Hello, Hale," he said. Mason swallowed. "Dame Grant." Grant nodded once. It wasn't friendly, it wasn't hostile. It was an acknowledgement that time couldn't erase certain roads. Grant's eyes shifted to Reeves. "You must be Clay's boy. You look like him." Reeves nodded, breathing deep. The mercenaries stiffened, glancing at one another. The odds had turned, and not in their favor. Grant cracked his knuckles. "We heard old ghosts were walking tonight. Thought we'd see for ourselves." Mason stepped forward. "Grant, listen." "No," Grant said. "You listen." The bar went silent. "You lied to us," Grant continued. "You left us in the dark for 20 damn years. You let us believe Clay betrayed the club." Mason bowed his head. "I know, and I'll carry that until I'm in the ground." Grant studied him, then glanced at Reeves, then at the letter lying on the bar. "You weren't the only one carrying ghosts," Grant said softly. "Clay came to see us, you know, years back. Told us he forgave you." Mason's head snapped up. "What?" Grant nodded. "Said he hoped you'd forgive yourself one day." A breath caught in Mason's throat. He'd dreamed of those words, but never believed them. Reeves stepped forward. "Then why didn't any of you come for him after the ambush?" Grant's expression darkened. "We didn't know he was alive. He kept that quiet. Said going after them would get the rest of us killed." A shadow passed over Grant's face. "He wasn't wrong." The mercenaries tensed. The radio hissed. "Enough reunion," Calderon's voice snarled. "Finish them." Grant laughed, a sound like gravel rolling down a cliff. "You think we rode across half the state tonight to die in a bar?" He stepped forward, towering. "You should have stayed in the desert where cowards belong." The lead mercenary lunged. The room exploded into motion, but not chaos. Calculated force. Bodies moving with purpose. Bar stools knocked aside, boots scraping wood, hands grappling, redirecting, pinning, no guns, no blades, just raw, desperate survival. Mason ducked a punch, grabbed a mercenary's wrist, and slammed him into a table. Doyle pinned another against the jukebox. Reeves, faster than any of them expected, drove his shoulder into the third, knocking him backward into a chair. The radio skittered across the floor. Calderon's voice screamed through static, "Get up! Finish them! Do not fail me again!" Reeves grabbed the radio. He lifted it slowly and crushed it under his boot. Silence. The mercenaries stilled, panic flickering in their eyes. Without the voice giving orders, their purpose shattered. Grant and two riders dragged them toward the exit. One mercenary snarled, "You can't stop him. Calderon will—" Grant cut him off. "No, you won't!" The door slammed behind them. The bar sagged into an exhausted quiet. Reeves leaned against the counter, chest rising and falling. Mason steadied himself on a stool, breath shaking. Grant approached him. "Tonight proved something," Grant said. "You're not the man you used to be." A beat. "You're better." Mason blinked, emotion rising like a tide he couldn't hold back. Reeves stepped closer. "So what now?" he asked quietly. Grant looked at Mason, at Reeves, at the letter. "Now," he said. "Now we finish what should have been finished 20 years ago." Mason met Reeves's eyes and saw no hatred, only resolve. The road wasn't done with them yet, but for the first time, they would ride it together. The desert was different at dawn. The wind, once cold and sharp, breathed slower now. The sky blushed pale orange. And the bar, that dusty outpost where the past had finally caught up, looked smaller, quieter, almost innocent. No one who drove past that morning would have guessed what the night had taken from the world, or what it had given back. Mason stood outside near the dirt lot, jacket over his shoulders, watching the horizon stretch into something he had avoided for 2 decades, a future. Reeves joined him, hands in his pockets, Clay's letter tucked safely inside his jacket. He didn't say anything at first. The silence between them wasn't heavy. It was healing. Finally, Reeves asked, "You going to run again?" Mason considered the question. For years, running had been his only instinct. Miles were how he breathed. Silence was how he slept. Distance was how he survived. "No," Mason said quietly. "I think I've run far enough," Reeves nodded. "My father thought you would stop one day." Mason exhaled slowly. "Your father was a better man than I deserved. He knew you'd say that." Reeves smiled, a small, tired smile. "He wrote something else, not in the letter, in his notes." Mason turned. "What did he write?" Reeves looked out at the desert. "Mason is flawed, but we all are. The difference is, he knows it, and that makes him the man I'd want beside me if the road ever calls again." The words hit Mason harder than any punch he'd taken in his life. His throat tightened. He had to look away from Reeves, not from shame, but from the weight of grace he still didn't know how to hold. Behind them, the riders of the last wardens stepped out into the morning. Grant approached, still carrying the firm authority of a man who'd buried too many brothers. He nodded at Reeves. "You rode hard tonight," Reeves shrugged. "I had help." Grant turned to Mason. "Calderon won't stop. That kind of man doesn't let go of power or grudges. But he knows now we're not scattered, we're not blind, and we're not afraid." Mason held his gaze. "So what happens now?" Grant lifted his chin toward the open highway. "The same thing that always happens. We ride, we listen, we wait for the truth to show us where to go next." The engines behind him rumbled to life, low at first, then stronger, like a heartbeat returning after a long illness. Reeves stepped forward. "I'm coming with you," he told Grant. Mason blinked. "You are?" Reeves nodded. "My father chased the truth alone." He looked at Mason. "I won't make the same mistake." Grant regarded Reeves for a moment, then Mason. Then something unexpected happened. Grant placed a hand on Mason's shoulder. "You know the roads, you know the ghosts, you know Calderon better than any of us. If you want, you can ride with us. Doesn't matter your past, matters who you are now." Mason swallowed, heart pounding. For the first time in 20 years, someone handed him not forgiveness, not sympathy, but purpose. Reeves extended his hand. "Mason, you coming?" Mason looked at the horizon. The long highway, the rising sun, the path he once believed he had no right to walk again. "I'm done running," he said. A quiet smile emerged, the kind a man wears when he meets himself again after losing track for too long. "I'm riding," Grant smirked. "Then let's go find the man who thinks he can hide from the desert." The engines revved, dust kicked up, the sun climbed higher. Mason mounted the bike someone offered him, old, heavy, loud, perfect, and as he rolled onto the highway beside Reeves, Grant, and the wardens, he felt something he did not expect. Not redemption, not victory, not even forgiveness, but alignment. For the first time in 2 decades, Mason Hale was riding not away from something, but toward it. And the road, that long, merciless road, whispered its old truth under the rising sun. Some lies are born to save a life, some truths are born to save a soul, and some roads never let a man forget who he really is.